Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, we're going to be talking about when your judgmental attitude hurts your relationships, and that's not only with your spouse, but with your children. And before we get into that, please do subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was on how to better care for your wife and what does caring for your wife really mean. Many women say they don't feel cared for, and that's why they don't want to have sex. Well, that is accurate for a lot of them. So, yes, being more loving and caring and protective can change your marriage, and that episode explains how. All right, so there's a lot of people who say stuff like, I would never cheat on my spouse. I can't imagine how somebody would do that. Or like, I would never be a stay-at-home mom. Or I would never be a working mom. Or I would never be somebody who doesn't exercise. Or I would never be like a vegetarian or anything. If you are somebody who's always making like these global judgments about other people, that means that you are judgmental. By definition, people who make a lot of judgments are judgmental. Now, these are the kind of people that I see have the most interpersonal problems, because they could be very bombastic and pompous, and they're usually talking about shit they've never experienced. So it's so funny. Like I talked in some other podcast about how when people are divorced, they like to make friends with each other because it's like, y'all know that you've made a mistake. Like, it's like very humbling. Nobody tries to get divorced. So it's like everybody that has got divorced, like at least they can't say that they make all their decisions correctly, So it's like I made the same analogy meeting somebody in AA. Like, you done fucked up somehow, so at least you do not have to be two people that are like posing around each other that one of them is more perfect than the next. Because it's already assumed that that you have made some poor decisions in your life and that you are a flawed person who never expected to be at whatever place that you're in life. It's the same sort of thing when people have teenagers, honestly, because teenagers can always do something or talk back in some way or misbehave in some way or do some stupid shit that you never thought that they would do given whatever your parenting style was. And then it's very humbling to be like I saw a meme. It was so funny. It was like, it was like, might as well, like my kid got a face tat, might as well bottle feed. like it meant like that the child getting a face tattoo is like such a bad decision that the kid made, that like everything that the parent had done, including breastfeeding, like didn't do shit, And it's funny, the older people get, usually the less judgmental they are if they are open-minded. Now, if they tended toward being closed-minded, then they get more and more and more judgy and critical of others. So people who started out kind of open-minded get even more so when they get very wise, but then other people who are old are very closed-minded because they kind of started out closed-minded and they never had any of these like super big, epiphanies. Like they certainly had fuck ups like everybody did, but they always kind of tried to save face, and they tried to say that anything that went wrong in their life wasn't their fault somehow. So then some people, and we know them if we're adult children of dysfunctional families, some people get into old age and they're just like the most judgmental people ever that have no empathy, and they're worlds apart from the wise older people that young people like to be around, who are super open-minded and understand kind of how any situation can happen. So that's the kind of person you want to be. Like, those open-minded, non-judgmental people are the people who tend to have healthy, thriving relationships with intimates, such as spouses and kids. Adult children in particular, like, really cannot stand judgmentalness in a parent, and that's the number one thing that leads to estrangement that I see, is when the child thinks that the parent is extremely closed-minded and only pushing their agenda, can never look back and say that they, the parent, messed something up, and instead just look around them and see how, and just criticize everybody and say everybody else messes up except for them. And also, more salient to many of you who are at an earlier place in life, no spouse has ever been like, good thing about my partner is they have really strong opinions on everything and they can never be wrong. Like, that's terrible. That's usually something where you're like explaining why you got divorced, versus explaining why you're in love with your partner. And women in particular, because they generally feel more vulnerable, again, evolutionary reasons for everything, but women do not like an aggressive, real, asshole kind of guy. And I talk about this a lot. Like, if you are very arrogant and condescending, the only recourse your wife has is to decide not to sleep with you, because like the only way she could kind of assert her own selfhood when interacting with you is to not be attracted to you and just detach from you in her mind. And so a lot of guys don't understand this, and they really confuse being alpha and assertive with like a guy who just can never change his mind, when in fact it's the opposite. Really successful, powerful men, CEOs, politicians, etc., they can always accept feedback. This is like a major thing. I work with a lot of CEOs, and like the number one thing they pride themselves on is being coachable. And that's probably why they like me, because I coach. Like I have no problem in giving advice based on the experiences that I've had, with clients in their situations. The number one thing of super successful people is that they're coachable. So if you are not coachable, and coachable, of course, goes without saying, means that you can admit that you were wrong. And therefore, that's something that you thought at an earlier point in your life was incorrect, in fact, led to errors, and now you're opening yourself up to learning about that, getting feedback, and proceeding, in the future to act differently. And that is something that women look up to very much and like in a partner. And it's the same thing for men. Like, the number one thing that I always talk about, what men don't like and what leads to men initiating divorce in the rare situations that they do, is a wife who is very anxious and closed-minded, and this isn't just in the bedroom. Of course, that doesn't help anything when it is, but, just in general, like everything that they say, their wife says no. Can we do this? No. Maybe we could do this? No. Is this fun? No. Can we do that? No. Can I touch you here? No. Can we travel here? No. Nobody wants that. And that sort of closed-minded, no kind of person usually thinks that their way is the best way, and other people make all these mistakes. And that's just not true. Like, all human beings are flawed and make mistakes. And the other important thing to realize is, if you are somebody that is always judging other people's experiences that you haven't been in, and of course, you've never been in anybody's shoes. Like, definitionally, you have never been in somebody's shoes. Because there's some people, like, here's what not to do. So let's say that you're a guy and your wife is depressed, and she's been chronically depressed for 20 years. And then you come in and you say, well, there was this one time in the Army that I felt that I was depressed, and I felt that way for 6 weeks. And so what I did was, I really just focused. I kept my head down. And in fact, I added some exercise in, even, on top of what I was already doing. And, ever since then, I really have understood that in order to not be depressed, you really just need to push your body to the max. And that's what I've kept on saying to my wife for 20 years, the past 10 of which have been sexless, because she hates me because I say such dumbass shit like that, right? So you don't want to be that person, because that man, he may have been depressed in the Army. I don't doubt that he was a depressed 20-year-old man. However, what he never was a chronically depressed 40-year-old woman. So then he don't know shit, right, about her experience. Nobody really knows about anybody else's internal experience. So just like the people who like cut off relationships with a friend because the friend had an affair. Why would you do that? Were you ever your friend? No. Were you raised in your friend's family? No. Do you have your friend's brain? No. Do you know what the hell your friend's situation was like? No. So people say, well, I would never have done that, so we can't be friends anymore. Listen, be friends with who you want. But the judgmentalness, if people who do that usually then have trouble, like if their child has an affair, right? Your adult child is caught, doing anything bad. Because instead of wanting to look inward and be like, holy shit, I must have raised my kid in a way that they were unhappy or that could have contributed, they say, oh no, my kid is just a bad seed somehow and I can't understand it, and so I'm going to just judge them, and I'm not going to empathize because I cannot empathize, because empathy would mean that I would do the same thing and I would never do the same thing. That's the kind of person who loses relationships with their kids. And of course, that's the kind of person who loses a relationship with their spouse. So, since you have never actually been your spouse or your friend or your child or anybody, you have no idea what it's like inside their body. You have no idea what it's like inside their brain. Why don't you just say, if I have no idea what it's like to be them, I like to tell myself that I wouldn't do X, Y, or Z, but I only know my own experience. And it's so funny because every single person who has either cheated or who has stayed in a relationship with someone who's cheated, I just use this one because it's the one people opine about just the most egregiously. Oh, I would never. Every single person that's either had an affair themselves or that stayed with somebody, with a partner who has cheated on them, and they worked through things and recovered or not, or whatever, they tried to stay together. Every single one of them in therapy every time has said to me, what? What do you guess they say? I never thought that I would do this. I thought I would never cheat. I was never the kind of person who would cheat. Never, 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 never. I would have staked my life on it. And then I met so-and-so. And that's how it goes, you know? Or I never would have taken back somebody who cheated. I was all over the internet telling people how terrible that was. Never take back somebody who cheated. And then, of course, I found out that my wife cheated, and it was a bit more complicated than that. And we're working on things now, and we hope you can help us. So it's the same kind of thing when you find out like that your kid did something that you thought you would never tolerate, or a friend did something. I mean, just anything, or some situation at work. So everybody, until they're in the situation, they judge, they say they're a certain kind of person. But you can never know what you will do until you are in the situation. I tell my kids this all the time. You will never know what it's like to be, in the next stage of your life until you're in the next stage of your life. You can only make so many plans, but you got to wait and be flexible. Your opinions may change so dramatically you couldn't even imagine it. And so children who have an excuse, right, because they're children, so they're black and white thinkers, will always say stuff like, like kids will say, you should try it with your own kids. Say, when do you think I knew that I wanted to be in my career? Usually they say things like, oh, always, since you were little, right? Because they can't understand it being different. And my kids, because they know that I'm pretty into being a psychologist and growing my business and all this stuff. They say, oh, you always wanted to be a psychologist, right? I said, no, I did not. I didn't even know about being a psychologist. I thought that I would be a teacher for a long time because my mother was a teacher. And then for a long time I thought I might be a doctor. But then when I was in grad school, because there was a person, I was always interested in people and psychology and things like that, but I thought it would just be kind of a hobby, something that made me read novels and watch reality TV. But then in grad school, somebody who was a PhD level psychologist, professor, wanted me to work in his lab. From there, I understood what it was to get a PhD. And things went from there. I certainly didn't grow up. My parents were not PhDs. I knew nothing about it. So you don't know anything until you know it. And basically children and closed-minded adults assume that you can know what you've not yet experienced. And you can't. You really, really can't. And the best thing that I've seen as inoculation for kind of existential crises is to make peace with the fact that you will never know what it's like to be in a certain situation until you're there. This is why I talk so much about aging and how people need to have conversations within their marriage about aging and expectations and hopes and dreams and what you can know and what you can't know. Because, for example, menopause, I talk about this all the time. There's all these super anxious, preoccupied attachment guys that, I work with or that, are write into me or what have you, and they're so anxious and they want to figure out how they can get out ahead of menopause in some way, and how you could figure out if your wife is still going to want sex after menopause. Is there some sort of algorithm that they could plug their wife's characteristics into, and then it'll spit out whether their wife is still going to like to have sex after she's 55? No. No, the women So many women after menopause are like, oh, I never thought I would be like, I never thought I would have zero desire. I never thought I would be like this. I was very sexual. I could never have predicted how my priorities would change. In fact, here's a really good analogy. Did you have any idea what it was like to have a baby before you had a baby? No. People before they have babies say all sorts of stupid shit. They're like, oh no, I'm still going to hang out with y'all. I'm still going to come to poker night every Wednesday. I'm still going to like be running and, in my running group and stuff, even with a newborn. And then like immediately they stop everything, because it's such a like massive blow to the system and you're not sleeping. And like with the little bit of time you have, you got to catch up on your work and this and that and the other. And you're certainly not going out drinking and stuff after you have a baby, even if you think you're going to be some cool person who does. Most people very quickly, almost immediately realize that they had literally no idea what it was like to be a parent, and so it's the same thing with any subsequent stage in life. Like people talk all the time, oh, I want to keep working, I don't want to retire. They don't really understand how tired they may feel when they're older. Like even that physiological change is really, really hard to think of, how you will feel physically very, very tired. And that is something that like older people go back and they're like, I must have thought that I would have the same amount of energy, but of course I don't. So anyway, my point is, do not be judgmental. It hurts your relationships and there's no logic for it, because anybody who has worked with people for a long time knows people never have any idea how they would act in a situation until they are in it. And frequently the way that they act is worlds different from what they thought. So when you find yourself judging other people, also realize that it stops your kids and your spouse from trusting and confiding in you, because if you're the sort of person that's always looking down on other people and saying, I would never do this, I would never do that, well, what if your kid does it? What if your kid ends up doing this or that? They would never tell you because they wouldn't trust you to be a soft landing place, because you're somebody who would never do this or never do that, and so the best you could be as a partner and as a parent is open-minded and warm. Open-minded and warm. And if instead you're realizing, well, shit, I'm rigid and cold, well, that could be a really good impetus to go into therapy. Therapy definitionally opens your mind. You're thinking about things differently. If you're doing anything useful at all, then it's a perspective changer, which can be very beneficial for people who struggle with being judgmental. And if you're judgmental, guess what? You were raised in a judgmental home. So it's not your fault, but it's your fault if you've thought about it now, if you don't work on it. And I'm sure that you could think about that your parents are judgmental and you would never have wanted to bring up X, Y, or Z to them because of their judgmentalness. Do you want to be that person for your own kids or for your spouse? Definitely not. And therapy can really, really help. All right, I hope this was interesting to you guys, and please do subscribe and join my Facebook group if you like to talk about these sorts of things. The blue subscribe button on my Facebook page, because usually the link does not work well on my description. And I will talk to y'all soon. Have a great day.